I really appreciate you spending the time. You could be eating, you could be outside, you could be doing anything else, and I appreciate you giving me a little bit of your time, and I will try not to waste it. I will try and provide some insights that I've gained along the way that may be helpful to you. If they don't resonate with you, please dismiss them. But I think it's helped me to connect with others to be more successful, not necessarily for me and what I wanted to do, but to be more successful in serving others. And I want to share these thoughts with you as well. So the first thing that comes to mind with this talk, crucial conversations with your hospital leaders. I have never seen a better group of communicators than the emergency medicine community. You're great communicators at the bedside and everywhere else, but I think what this is really about is focusing on who's receiving your message and what message you're delivering. You're great at the bedside, you're great at many other places, but sometimes there's a disconnect between your C-suite leaders, hospital leaders, and where we are approaching them and how we're approaching them. Oftentimes, we're approaching them with an ask. This is what I want, and this is why I want it. If I make a cogent argument for why I want what I want, you should give me what I want. And when you don't, I feel disappointed because you basically said I wasn't good enough about explaining it, or the value of what I explained did not strike well with you. I think we need to change that approach a little bit. So what can you do that you want to accomplish that helps them? So I think everything that you approach a hospital leader about and a C-suite leader about, you need to be thinking about how does it impact their mission? And I know that this may be a novel concept or new concept to you, but even the business hospital leaders are in healthcare. I think a lot of clinicians, particularly earlier in their career, feel like, well, there is the clinical staff, and then the people who are business operators that happen to be in healthcare. Most, maybe not all, but most have committed their entire careers to healthcare management. So from their perspective in particular, they see themselves as integral to healthcare. Not necessarily the clinical side of it, although they would love to be a part of that. They actually know that they're committed to healthcare. You've got to give them that. If you create separation in that regard, they will sense it, they will feel it, and your requests will be disingenuous. So I have a right to need things because I understand patients. You hold the keys to doing it, but you understand very little to nothing. You don't say those words, but I can't tell you how many times that sentiment has been received. And I've heard the stories, I've seen interactions, and I've grown through my career to make sure that I don't cover that ground in that way. So the key is, what can you do for them? And how do your goals align with theirs? And you don't even know how you align with theirs without asking and knowing in advance. Quite honestly, I think you need to know the mission of where you're working. I think that's fairly standard, but I think you need to know it. You need to state it. These people live and breathe by that mission. How does what you want to do impact their mission? What are their key performance indicators, the KPIs that they're held accountable to? There are pressures, you're probably not surprised to hear, on the hospital administrator. What measures are you being observed by, or your performance measured by? How can I help you to do that? So if I need something in the emergency department that does X, Y, and Z, do you know that I can positively make movement and move the needle on KPI number 3, which is hospital throughput? And here's how I can do it to help you. And I think if you approach it in that way, where you are mutually beneficial with what you are suggesting, I think it'll go a long way. But it really is, just like at the beginning of this conversation and discussion, it should be the beginning of your relationship and the beginning of your conversation with any leader about how you can also help them. If you're scheduling time with them or asking them for something, they know you want something. But there's nothing wrong with making sure that you're mindful of what they need as well. And that brings you greater credibility. And in any relationship of any kind, we won't go into details in the interest of time, if you are only self-serving, it won't go very well and it won't go very far. Even if it's the right thing to do for patients or someone else, that doesn't serve the relationship well. So manage the relationship and make sure that people know you're not just trying to fulfill your agenda, which may be very appropriate and on the high moral road, but it's also making sure you're mindful of what other people need to do as well and the competing priorities that they may have. All right, so sometimes we find that we have the wrong skills for the right job. Oftentimes, we are elevated to leadership because we have been great clinically. There's nothing wrong with that, but you don't need to be great clinically to be a great leader in the emergency department or anywhere else. It is so much better if you are, and it is helpful. But management is not medicine. And the things that made you great at the bedside may not necessarily play out as well, let me word it that way, in a operational or leadership conversation at the hospital. So some of what makes you great can absolutely tank you or crush you in a different type of conversation. Let me go into more detail. So, in other words, you need to be a consensus builder when you're trying to gain support for a project, support for a whole policy development, or whatever you're trying to do, the change you're trying to make, the request you have, you should build consensus. If you're the only one who's championing this idea, no one else is offering their support, what that says to the leader is, maybe no one else cares about this, and maybe you're passionate about it, but this is not a global issue that I can make a lot of people happy with and that a lot of people agree with you with. So you've got to make sure you build consensus. At the bedside, you need to be decisive. You can't build consensus when you decide if you're going to implement the massive transfusion protocol. Show of hands in the resuscitation bay, how many people would like to go this direction? How many would like to go that direction? That does not inspire confidence with your staff, patients, or anyone else. This is applying your leadership skills in a different way. Consensus building when you're building relationships and you're trying to move policy. But when you're at the bedside, it's entirely different. So you have to pivot your leadership skills to make sure they're working best for you. So clinical success, maybe you're building consensus 10% or 20% of the time, but you're decisive 90 or 80%. It is nice at the bedside when you can to get the input of others. I've heard many people say, okay, we're going to pronounce this patient, we're going to terminate resuscitation. Does anyone else in the room have any ideas of things that we may have overlooked or omitted that we should do at this time? I don't think that signals a lack of confidence. I think that signals some humility and engagement with your staff and making sure you're recognizing them as professionals and allowing them to weigh in, because it's important to them too. You're still being decisive. So I think that's a good thing. So there is some opportunity for that clinically and to build consensus, but not for very long. So let me know. I will come back to you in about, is 2 hours enough? And then we'll decide if we're going to pronounce this person. No, it doesn't work that way. But the point I'm driving to that I mentioned earlier that I think is worth repeating is consensus building is important. So if there's something you want to do in the ED, this is what we all feel. I talk to all of our staff. I talk to all these people. Let's expand that. I've also talked to radiology leaders. I've talked to the hospital medicine side of things. This request will benefit all of these service lines. And you look outwardly for the support that you need to accomplish what you believe is a good idea. And that takes time and it takes commitment. But to accomplish what you need to in service of others, it is worth the commitment of time. It is worth the commitment of effort. And I hope that you'll agree with me on that point. So your administrative success, you have to flip that equation. You've got to really spend much of your time building consensus, 90% of your time building consensus, and really, perhaps 10%, 20% really being very decisive. And at some point, you've been in meetings, you've been in conversations, you've considered a concept for a year, and it is the same meeting with the same minutes and the same discussion, which is circular to the point that you have never-ending operational vertigo. At some point, somebody has to step forward and say, we've had the conversation, there is no new information, there's no new data, this is what I'm recommending. Be decisive, bring that to the bedside, from the bedside to the operational world if you can and when it's appropriate, because people really appreciate our decisiveness when it's applied in the right circumstances. All right, so the pathway to ensured success. It doesn't have to be this way, but probably the easiest pathway to make sure that you are heard and you have a voice and perhaps you get an audience for what you want to do at the hospital is through your chief medical officer. But I will admit, you may not have one. Sometimes those positions go unfilled for a while. Sometimes the facility just doesn't have one. So there may be another clinical champion you can go through. Or you absolutely find that there are other avenues to work through as well. So there is commonality in background and professionalism. So you may not practice the same specialty or may not have been trained in the same specialty, but yet colleague to colleague, they will understand your language, your perspective. Meet with them first before you try and vet a concept with a larger group of leaders. And the C-suite will largely defer to the CMO on clinical issues. What do you think? Is that right? Is that wrong? Somebody came to me, they wanted to do this. Should we do that? So you need to win the hearts and minds of the clinical leaders to make sure that when that concept is vetted with their inner circle, that they are supporting you. And you can ask that question. So have I given you enough today that when you speak to the CEO or the COO, will you be able to support this concept? Or do I need to give you more? So in other words, the option isn't there not to support it. What else do I need to bring to you to make sure that you feel confident in supporting this concept? Because they've already said, well, I think that's a great idea. If they made the mistake of placating you by saying, oh, that's a wonderful idea, and I'm really glad you brought it to me, and they didn't mean it, well, you're not going to take no for an answer. So what else can I bring to you that will make you feel most comfortable to bring this to your boss? And if they said at the beginning, well, listen, I really don't know if I can support the idea. I have a different perspective. Well, then okay. Then you don't need to push further at this point and say, well, what can I do at this point so that you will take it to your boss? No, if they're not there, then you have to make sure that you're asking questions so you understand what people need so that you can make your best argument for what you're trying to accomplish. Using alternative pathways can really disenfranchise the CMO. The end around or triangulation is not a good thing. If you're going to go to others, for instance, if you are developing a relationship with your CEO, and I would like it if you would, make sure your CMO knows that. Hey, listen, I think it's important that I really keep the CEO informed about what's happening in the emergency department. It's part of X, Y, and Z program and projects and their KPIs in the hospital and the system and the company, whatever it is, it's important to them. Would you like to be included in those meetings, or do you just want me to update you afterwards? Do not exclude them, but make them feel comfortable that you're not talking about them when they're not in the room. That's what happens when we don't speak to people with transparency. This is what I'm trying to do. I don't want to bother you with bringing you into another meeting. Nobody needs another meeting, but I really think there's value in me updating the CEO on these things. So you just let me know. If you want to be there, I'll try and schedule it with you, but I'll update you afterwards, and trust me, you will know the things that I've spoken about to make sure that you're fully informed. Again, going full circle, back to the concept I mentioned a few moments ago. At some point, that CEO is going to go back to the CMO and say, do you support so-and-so? Well, that person has never misled me. I met with them already about this before you did, and there are some unknowns with this request, but yes, in general, I'm supportive of the concept, and I think we should move forward to explore it. If you do the end around, or you triangulate around your CMO or your chief nursing officer, they're not going to give you the support when you need it. And you don't want to create conflict within the C-suite. So for instance, if you make a great argument to the CEO and they're not clinically trained and they think it's great, they run out of their office and they are so excited about what you said, but then they go to the clinical leaders and they're like, well, we're really not so sure. And and Kevin never even came to us about this, so the question is, why wouldn't he? And also, we don't think that there's enough information to go forward with it. Everything you just did with the CEO, from relationship building to getting support for your project or your idea, have now gone. Not just for this concept, it's for next time too. Because then they understand the conflict that was created and who created it. You did. So it's oftentimes unintentional, but if you're mindful about how you interact with people and being respectful of people and the roles they have and not undermining them and giving them certainly the respect that is owed and due to them, you will never run into that. And if all you are doing is well-intentioned and hopefully largely, if not entirely, in service of others, you have nothing to hide. Share your ideas with others and make sure they're aware of them, and then there won't be any question what your motivations are. Okay, the hierarchy of yield and success. So I would say your time is limited. Is that a fair statement? This is an interactive moment for us. I've been patient, my friends. I have been. So do you find that your time is limited? Okay, your time is limited. Sherry, thank you. Sherry's time is limited, but I don't know how you have found the time to even be here today, because it must take hours to get the hair to look so great. I tell you, it is amazing. It really is. I mean that really in a complimentary way. It really looks great. I've known her for years. I've seen Sherry through many different hairstyles. All of them I have loved. This, I will tell you, is the best. It really is. It's the best. Well, what I'm sharing with you here is spend your time on the things that will give you the greatest yield. Is it possible that you may be able to find something that helps governance of the hospital? So in policy, governance structure with bylaws, et cetera, anything on the governance side maybe isn't something you do a lot of, but being mindful of what helps others, something that helps operations and something that helps patients, that's a clinical benefit. If it's just isolated to one of these domains, it better be pretty important, or it's not worth anyone's time or energy to focus on it. If you can get 2 out of the 3, that's really a home run. If you can get 3 out of 3, where it affects all these domains, and you can communicate that effectively, don't let people stumble across it. Hey, by the way, I'm asking you for this because this is what it does. This is what it solves for us, for you, for me, for the patients. I'll give you a good example. So I'll talk about it in more detail later, but this is a sub-conversation about geometric length of stay. You've probably all heard about it, and you probably know that, that ED boarding, I'm expecting a response here. ED boarding is a symptom of hospital throughput. It is not an indication of operational dysfunction in the emergency department. Right? Very important. So geometric length of stay, as you can imagine, as a hospital administrator, has been very important to me. If you can optimally manage your bed capacity, you can solve many, many problems, including this age-old issue of boarding to a certain and substantive degree in the emergency department. Well, so going through this process at my former role with HCA, I remember talking to multiple staff members on the floor. This patient is beyond their geometric length of stay, their estimated length of stay. What can we do to move them through the process? Because someone else in the community probably needs that bed, and if we're not really providing them the care that is helping them at this point, then we need to decide how we can expedite that. Anybody that needs care should stay. Geometric length of stay should not be moving people out of the hospital for economics. It should be being efficient with care delivery. Many things came to mind or were brought to my attention operationally. One of them that stands out that speaks to this concept was we can't get an MRI. They've been waiting for an MRI for 3 days. Once we get the MRI, post-stroke protocol, we can send them home. So we will speak about data later, and if you looked at the syllabus, you'll know that. Data is important. Looked at data. And there was a significant delay in disposition from the time of order to the time of completing the MRI and the time of discharge at that point. I won't go through the data in the interest of time. It was significant, it was reproducible, and it was standard. That's what was happening. So quickly did a time study. 1 MRI for a level 1 trauma center at that time, which was growing and expanding and getting more resources and doing all it needed to provide great care, but 40 requests for MRIs per day. Do you know what the processing time, which was pretty efficient, allowed the facility to perform in a given day? 20. Very clear that the demand had outstripped capacity. So here's the conversation, and it could be governance, but it's mostly operations and clinical. But here are the domains that it impacted. And this is the conversation that quickly resulted in, it was a 10-minute conversation that resulted in an approval of a new MRI, a second MRI. Are you aware that this is impacting geometric length of stay? Beds that you need are occupied by people who do not need them any longer. Are you aware that people are signing out AMA? It's a clinical issue because they can't get the care they need and they don't want to wait anymore. Are you aware that that revenue is walking out the door with them as they don't get their MRI? Are you aware that experience of care is impacted by this? It is reflected in our surveys. That's part of the data analysis. It impacted all of those domains: clinical quality, experience of care, and revenue cycle. That's why it was a 10-minute conversation. Here's the data. We need to approve another MRI. Not just, we need an MRI. It's best for our patients. You need to hear us because we're the clinicians. you're right in those words, but there's no depth to your comments. And how does it help others? Fixing problems in multiple domains is how to spend your time, even if it expands you beyond the walls of the emergency department. As a matter of fact, I would encourage you to do so because it improves your credibility. You become a leader in your facility, and I love it from a career diversification standpoint for you. You never know what opportunities may be ahead of you, and if you are prepared for them, you'll be able to walk through that door and accept those opportunities with confidence. But if you've never functioned in any project outside of the emergency department, there's nothing wrong with that, but it does limit your scope. And if you want a more broad or expansive scope in the future, take those opportunities to work outside the emergency department from a leadership standpoint and learn from others the way they think, how they communicate, and what's important to them. Sometimes there's great entertainment value in that. And also sometimes you will learn that, wow, I can change my perspective on the way I look at how this particular situation or process or policy works. So try and hit multiple domains. Be thinking about it in advance. So can we commoditize leadership? It doesn't sound nice, but we certainly can. And we have to make sure that your impact with your effort, your time, your energy is scalable. If you expend all your energy on one little thing, even if you get one little win, you're exhausted and it can't pay itself forward to the next opportunity if you don't do this next step. You've got to create political coin, and I'll explain it in more detail in a moment. But you got to commit the time to creating and nurturing relationships with the people that you are serving and the people who you are going to ask to do things for you. You got to communicate well. You've got to communicate the great things that have happened and the successes so they know what the track record is, and absolutely continuing to work very, very hard. Again, as I said, coming down to managing those relationships. When you do things for others, you gain political coin you can put in your pocket, and it is most impactful when you do things for others and you didn't have to. And I tell you what, I see some leaders in this room that I have learned that from. I won't name them personally, but you know their names. They're on the agenda, and I'm seeing a couple of them right here in the front as well. It's selfless service. And when you do that, people remember the way that you made them feel and what you accomplished before. And if it's the right thing, but it's what you want, why is what you want the only thing you ever come and talk to me about and the only thing you ever solve? It sounds like you're the only right thing. That sounds like selfish service. That does not play well, but also it's not intentional. You're busy, and when you have a need, you go ask for it. But if you don't create the political coin, really basically building relationships, when you need something and someone else has no reason to give it to you, you know what? They might just do it anyway. You can make the strong argument, but even if that doesn't carry the water or carry the day or answer the question, your credibility may get the answer that you need. And you've got to make good on the promises you made with that request so you can go back to them and say, thank you for trusting me. You didn't have to. I appreciate it. And here's the outcome. You're doing it for two reasons. Of course, number one, to thank them. Number two, you're going back and you're communicating the success and you're building the relationship. You were not wrong in your judgment to trust me. And I don't want you to forget that you trusted me when you didn't need to, because now you're going to trust me even more when you don't need to. It's important to not let these relationships go their own direction. Any relationship in life needs to be managed and nourished and cultivated if it's worth anything to you. If you're not doing that, you're just saying this isn't a relationship, or it's a relationship not worth working on. All right, so kind of a sidebar on the competencies here. So really it's prioritizing time to build these relationships and to have these communications. Communicating, again, the successes that are happening. Yes, we have drawbacks. We have issues that are happening, but look what we did this month. Look what we did this quarter. We are making progress. We're moving the needle on these things, but I need help on these couple of things also. These two help you, and honestly, I have to admit this one is really isolated to staff engagement in the emergency department, and I really need to do, whatever. I need to do a party for them, whatever it is. But I really need this because it will help us. But then emphasizing how you've already helped them in other ways. So your relationship, as I mentioned earlier, establishes your credibility. and it really demonstrates your selfless service. And I will venture to guess that most, if not all of us, who've chosen emergency medicine as who we are, not as a job, but as who we are and it's in our DNA, we serve people selflessly at great personal expense every day and at great gratification. So this is not a new concept for you. It's just turning that same concept to people that maybe you hadn't thought should be included in that circle of selfless service also. These are good people. They just trained in a different pathway than you did, but their career commitment is to healthcare, most of them. It's just not clinically based, and they don't understand necessarily all the details of what you do. But do they hold you in the highest regard and respect you? Absolutely. So you start the relationship in a place that no one else can. You're an emergency physician, you're the assistant medical director, you're the medical director. You start the conversation from a place of authority, and it means you don't have to speak with authority. You can be kind, you can be compassionate, you can be persuasive, and your credentials will carry the day as far as being forceful with your communication. Others who don't have your credentials and your expertise sometimes have to lead with being a stronger leader, let's word it that way, with the way that they communicate, and that doesn't go well for them often. All right, foundations of organizational communication. Quickly on this note, so who you are, you've got to create your own brand with the people that you communicate with, and people in your life. Do they know the kind of person you are and be consistent? Can they trust you? Do you have integrity? Whatever else it is who you are. Maybe you're the funniest person in the hospital. If you are the funniest person where you work and you ask for a meeting with people, they're going to expect some plucky comic relief in the meeting. I'm going to tell you what, you got to deliver. So make sure that who you are is consistent and you make sure you deliver on those things. I think it's very important. So what you want to accomplish has to be guided by your personal principles. I'm always focused on patient care. I'm always focused on our staff. I'm always focused on these three things. I won't even tell anyone else about a concept if it doesn't accomplish these three things, because those are my guiding principles, and that is who I am as a leader. And I have to convince myself first that this idea is a good one before I ever let it out of the filter. And can I communicate that effectively to others so they'll believe it's a good idea? And it's really, really important to be able to do that. Establish your guiding principles. I know we know who we are, but can you articulate that? You're not going to sit down with the CEO of a hospital and say, I would like to explain my guiding principles. No, it's a very internal thing. But if we don't know ourselves as well in those circumstances as we need to, we will be less effective in persuading people to think the way we would like them to think and the way that we do on any given topic. So lead with your guiding principles, how you intend to get there. You got to tell people your approach, and it's got to be collaboration. It can't be top down. It can't be because I said so. It can't be because this is what the literature says. Those can be supportive comments maybe in a small dose. But the key is, how do you get there? We can get there through collaboration. I've already had conversations with this person, that person. If you are sent back to collaborate, it's an epic fail. So great. Have you talked to, on this CT or MRI emergency department throughput issue, have you talked to the director of radiology? Have you talked to the medical director of radiology? Have you talked to patient access, the registration people? Well, I was going to do that, but I want to talk to you first. Well, if they're not on board, I really don't have any more time for the conversation. People will be respectful, but again, you're not prepared. Yeah, collaboration is the way to do this. We all believe it's a problem. We can't solve it all, but in these particular studies, we believe if we did this, we can make this happen, and here's what I would like to ask of you. Or I'm just informing you, we're trying to fix this problem, and this is how. So what are you here to ask for today? Nothing. I'm here to let you know we're trying to fix your problem. What did we just do? Create a political coin. So you're not asking me for anything. Do you know the CEO of the hospital and the COO of the hospital, and I will also tell you the CMO of the hospital, others, all in the C-suite, field so many hallway conversations and scheduled meetings, and there's usually a concern or a request. There's nothing wrong with that. They're used to expecting you to ask for something. Hey, let's go crazy. Why don't you schedule a meeting just to tell them how you're serving them, and don't ask them for a darn thing. And if they don't bring it up, you bring it up. Are you aware that I'm here not to ask for anything? Because I don't want that to be what our relationship is about. There may be times when I need to, but right now I want to let you know the progress we're making on this because I know it's important to you. That's worth your time. Absolutely, it's worth your time. Just like it's worth your time to buy a birthday gift for a family member, to not forget an anniversary. Those are different types of relationships. But if this is a relationship worth having, and I will tell you, I believe it is professionally for sure. I think it is personally also. I think you will be more effective in your role and you will feel more fulfilled in your career. You want to be fulfilled, not having arguments and demanding all the time, but winning people with influence. All right, so don't deviate from your guiding principles and your approach. You know the SEC Rule 156? So prior performance does not necessarily guarantee future expectations, something along those lines. I don't have that exactly quite right. But the point is, it may not always go the same, but it won't go the same if you're not the same. If you're not consistent in who you are, your guiding principles, and who you are in front of them, it all goes out the window. And I will tell you, it will take more than hours, more than days, sometimes years to develop trust with some people. And in a fraction of a second, in one interaction, you can lose that trust. Do not waste the time that you have spent building trust. So don't deviate from your approach and who you are. Don't do something that is self-serving when you spend so much time to be serving others, because then the last thing they remember is the selfish service that you asked for. If you know that it sounds selfish, you can let them know. I know I don't have a strong argument for this, but this is what I'd like to do, and it is in service of others in this way. Whatever you want to say, but don't allow anyone to ever think what you're doing is motivated for your own personal gain. And if you need to say it outwardly so they know, so there's no doubt, you have to make sure that's the case. All right, so precious resource of the C-suite, I think it's the same precious resource you have, and your efficiency optimizes theirs. It's really time. If you can go into a meeting and you can schedule 30 and be done in 15, I think that's amazing. If you only need 15, only ask for 15. If they don't have time to talk about family and friends or other things, then don't. And I would say I would leave it to the end. Hey, listen, I want to make sure I use your time well. I'll jump right in, but how's your family? If they start to talk about those things, fine. But they have limited time. They're going to be respectful, but it could be the 11th similar meeting in a row. And they're skipping lunch that day to accommodate this one. So and I know you skip lunch every day, and probably some of you, it's so unusual to be here, and anytime you want to, you can get up and go to the bathroom. Because I know, when you're working, that's not the case. We are medical camels. Absolutely, our bladder capacity is pretty impressive, that's for sure. So I know that you go through a lot, and what you do as well, they don't necessarily know that. But really be mindful of their time and yours and be really efficient. Be prepared. All right, the framework for success, and again, this is all conceptual, and it's based on some experiences that I've had, and I dismiss this if it doesn't resonate with you, but if even one thing in this conversation or in these bullets is helpful to you, then I'll be glad that I've shared them. Accountability results in expanded authority. I can tell you with absolute certainty, if you say you're going to do something and you're accountable, even if it doesn't go exactly the way you expected, you identify where the limitations were and what you did. Listen, I want to be accountable. This didn't go the way I expected, and here's what I'm going to do to course correct. Accountability will gain further trust, and you will get expanded authority. It doesn't matter where you work. They're going to come to you for solutions. I can trust that person because they will do what they say they're going to do. They're good at what they say they can be good at. And when it doesn't go right, I'm not going to have to find it because they're going to hide it from me. We all know the world's an imperfect place and things don't go exactly by design all the time. So when someone comes back and says, listen, I didn't see this coming, I'm going to have to deviate 20 degrees this direction, it's going to take me a little longer, it's important. And by the way, when you have a deadline, if you can't meet that deadline, don't hide behind it and wait for someone to come to you or hope that you can make it 2 days later and then explain why it was late. Go to somebody in advance of the deadline and say, listen, I can't meet that deadline and this is why. Can I have an extension? Yeah, that makes sense. Or at the time, you should say that timeline isn't going to work. This is why. Because I am the subject matter expert and I need an extra week on this to do it right. You want it done right, so I need a little extra time. But I've seen more people do the latter. Well, I'm just going to keep working hard and feverishly at this and I'll just get it done as quickly as I can. Maybe they don't know. I'm here to tell you, as a leader and as an administrator in many different capacities, we know. When I have worked with you on something and I've asked you to do it or you agreed to do it on a one-on-one conversation or in a group, I've either made a mental note or I've wrote it down. If it's important enough to have this conversation, this is when I can expect the work product. It's your credibility. It's up to you. And it's not a lack of credibility when you come back and say, yeah, this is where we are and I can't meet the deadline. This is why I need a little extra time. Would that be acceptable to you? It's great. It's easy. It's not a sign of failure to do that. It's a sign of failure to not recognize that you need to update people when it's not going according to plan. Have regular meetings. Again, I mentioned it earlier. I would recommend that all of you meet with C-suite members if you can on a regular basis. It's a time commitment. It doesn't have to be long. 15 minutes once a month with your CEO if they'll have you. And if you don't waste their time, they're going to be happy to do it. Have the COO come in if they want to. Let the CMO know you're doing this. They can join you as well. CNO, they can come in too. If you have a topic that involves nursing, well, maybe you bring somebody with you, the nursing director from the ED, or you can bring the CNO. Make sure you're mindful to not exclude people who will connect the dots about what your motives are inappropriately if you don't include them or let them know you're having that conversation. Timely follow-up, I touched on that. If you can't hit a deadline, but you need to let people know that you're making progress. There are many times when there are many things going on and it's off the radar of the leader and you come back and say, hey, remember we talked about this a month ago and this is a 6-month timeline. Here's the progress we've made. Wow, thanks for telling me. I didn't have to come to you. So helpful. Shared goals, again, making sure that this is how we're going to accomplish this. This is what you want out of it. This is what I think we need to do out of it and how it helps my department. And these goals will be what we accomplish with this project or this initiative. And selfless service, I think, is really important. You first. You give, and then others will give as well, even to the point of self-deprecation if it needs to be. So I will share this horribly embarrassing image with you, but we had a staff engagement program at HCA, and we're limited with some departments who would actually fill out the engagement survey. The engagement survey wasn't just local. With HCA, it was tracked by division, it was tracked by the group, and tracked by Nashville as well. This was important to the organization that they knew that the staff were engaged and happy and how they could improve relationship with staff. It improved staffing, retention, many, many things. So this is a big deal, and we weren't getting the traction we needed in some areas. So people came up with the Gatorade plunge or challenge. So let me see if this will... Yeah, this is me. Ready? Thank you, Trauma Team, for your engagement survey. I'm so embarrassed to show this here, but hey, listen, you got to be first sometimes. And I didn't even have anything to wear for this freaking thing. So if you will notice the Adidas flip-flops, the swim gear, all of that, that was all from Dick's Sporting Goods the night before. And hey, I'm not a big fashion guy, but that all matches. I'm just telling you. It actually somewhat matched with the color of Gatorade that they used as well. But the point I'm making, did I want to do it? No, it was embarrassing. And was it sticky? Incredibly sticky. I couldn't get that stuff off for the longest time. But nonetheless, the staff realized it, and the leaders realized, okay, we're all in this together and we want this to get done. So when they met their benchmark, I did that. So anticipating competing priorities. If you want to do something or ask somebody to do something and it takes away from something else that's happening, it can be a problem. Ask them, does this interfere with something else that you're working on? How can we work around that? How can we combine the two? Can you cede control? This is so hard, particularly in our world of emergency medicine. You've got to be able to say, if I plant the seed and this actually works out, it doesn't matter that I was in control of it or not. And trust me, everyone will know that your DNA is in the thought process, the content, the project, and the leadership. When you push people out of the way to get into the spotlight, to gain credit for something you did, it's not a good look. And believe me, people know what you've done. They will recognize when you push other people into the spotlight. And the people who matter most will know what the genesis of this success was and where it came from. So give people control. What does that also do? It brings more buy-in. You want people to love what you're doing. You want followers to come in and join with your passion, with what you're trying to accomplish. And you step back, you lean against the wall, you cross your arms, and you just smile. Look what you just created. People will know that your leadership created this. You don't have to claim control all the time. But as you were earlier in your career, earlier with leadership, establishing yourself, you probably needed to do that a little bit so people knew how great you were. The further you go in leadership, the more you need to step back, allow others to do the work once you have set the direction you're going to go and set that course, and make sure that you don't have to take credit for it. Thank everyone else. And by the way, and when people thank you, you just deflect it, it goes back to the team. Because the team oftentimes are the ones that really executed expertly on what you wanted to get done. It's about the outcome, not about you. All right, so when you are going to meet with a leader, it can be really quick and easy. The mini business proposal, I think, is really important. It's got to sound like you have their interest in mind, and you do. Not just sound that way, but you actually are going to make sure that that's the case. And you've got to show that you have some acumen from a business standpoint that reflects what they want to know about a proposal. What's the impact to the business, return on investment? This does not have to be an exhaustive business proposal, but you can write it down or you can speak to it. And it should be definitive. Here's the definitive aspect of an emergency physician again. This is what we want to do. This is the intended outcome. Now, if X, Y, and Z happen, it may not go exactly according to plan. Here's what we're trying to manage that. Here's what we're trying to do to make sure that doesn't happen. And here are the qualifications. Definitive, but you qualify. Because you can't predict the future and every aspect of a project. And you want to be able to go back and say, if it didn't go according to plan, well, yes, we anticipated this, and we talked about that when I first mentioned it to you. And we're managing through that much in the way that I said that we would. And so the business of healthcare delivery is really integral to doing the right thing for patients. That's what we always say. But what I want to share with you, and I've seen this over and over and over again, and behind the scenes, I'm going to tell you, in the conversations you may not be involved in, people who are not clinicians are offended when you say, well, this is the right thing for patient care. And it implies to them that they've spent their life in hospital administration not caring about patients. If you default to that argumentative statement, your political coin has been spent, your relationship is damaged, and you just told them what you do is not important. You don't take care of patients. You don't benefit patients. You don't provide service for patients. That's what I do. And going forward, anything you would like to do through that office to benefit patients isn't going to happen, most likely. It's going to come from someone else, or someone else is going to have to carry that message. So be really careful with falling on that sword in a meeting or in a group discussion. Collectively, you can carefully make the statement, of course, well, yes, if we do this, we will benefit patients. But when you argumentatively declare, what we're trying to do, and you don't want to do this, is the right thing to do for patients, it really never, ever plays out well for you. And I've really, I won't say ever, but rarely seen it result in the outcome that you want. All right, the power of communication, just a couple quick quotes here for you. The single and most dangerous word to be spoken in business is no. The second most dangerous is yes. Lois Wise, she was the advertising executive from Smucker's Jelly. Remember that? With a name like Smucker's, it must be great. I mean, that's simplicity at its finest, but it worked. They sold a lot of jelly and jam, my friends. But I will tell you, I love the comment, not necessarily the source of where she worked, but, you know, I think no is the worst word. And well, I would kind of paraphrase what she said, that you can always provide a qualified yes, with rare exceptions. Sometimes you hear some things and you can let people down easy, but it's like, yeah, that is not going to happen. We could do a support group and get together later in the back and give me your example of when someone wanted to do something completely left of center and you just had to say, are you outside your mind? We are not going to do that, but you have to be kind about it. But there's oftentimes a way where you can say, well, that's a really good idea. We can't do exactly that, but if we move this a little bit, 20 degrees this direction, or if we did it this way, I think we can try and accomplish it. Are you willing to accept those changes, those amendments, those whatever you want to word them as? I think it's important. So I think the qualified yes is a tool that you can use in communication. It's worked well for me, and quite honestly, I'm a people pleaser. I'd rather people be happy and not be negative, and I know you might feel like you're being decisive and you're being direct. No. Well, you are saying, no, you can't do what you asked me, but you're trying to think with your innovative minds how you can get them close to what they wanted while you're making sure that it works for others outside of their mind. and outside of their smaller circle. So the single best problem in communication is the illusion that it has taken place. George Bernard Shaw. So a Nobel-winning playwright, 1925, I think this is amazing. We think we talk to people, and because we've had a conversation, we think there's been full disclosure. Without going into too much detail, I will give you a recent example. I spoke to a leader in an organization not too long ago who talked about, hey, my title doesn't really match what I'm doing. And I said, well, you're doing great work. Tell me what that title means to you and tell me what you'd like that title to reflect. And it was more expansive, and it did seem to fit what that person was doing. We had a meeting, and we had other agenda items, and I said, let's go back to the title conversation. Did you tell me everything I need to know? Because what I'm hearing when you're saying title is a lack of recognition. And along with a lack of recognition, have you had a lack of empowerment? When was the last time you had a promotion? Do you feel that you're deserving? Is that what you're asking for? And with a promotion, do you feel you're fairly compensated for the work you're doing? I don't know if we can accomplish all of that, but if that's the intended conversation, let's have that now, because I want to make sure that you're heard. And we spent the rest of the meeting largely talking about that. But I do think, for whatever reason, there was hesitation, there was caution, and I think that the message initially was buried in a very deep agenda and very subliminal. But us as leaders, we have to make sure, did we actually have the appropriate level of communication on a topic? Because I'll guarantee you that person probably went away from that meeting if it went just as that subliminal statement as, well, I said something and nothing was ever done. I'm not empowered, I'm getting less engaged, I'm not recognized, my title doesn't make sense, I haven't been promoted, I'm undercompensated. And that results in somebody leaving an organization when they're a valued employee. Read between the lines and make sure, have we accomplished everything in this meeting we need to? Has everyone been heard? Did we talk about the right things? Be really overt with that. If you didn't make progress in a meeting, everybody has wasted their time, especially you. And I don't want you to waste your time. All right, there's nothing cooler than saving patients. Is that true? Are you right? Oh, are you serious? Do I have to go back to the first slide and start over? Because I will do that. That would be crazy, right? In 12 minutes and 53 seconds, I can do it. So we won't do it. But really, there isn't anything cooler, and you get to do it, and you've done it in your careers. I mean, what a fulfilling life to be an emergency physician and then to also be a leader in healthcare, a leader in emergency medicine. Wow, we are so fortunate, so blessed to have these opportunities. But administrators serve an important role too. They want a little taste of what you have, but they know they chose a different path for a variety of really good reasons. I've heard many people say, I could have gone that way, but I really, really wanted to do this. I've heard many people say, I really wanted to go into healthcare, but yeah, the clinical side, I just couldn't do that piece. I don't like blood or whatever it is. I mean, they want to be doing a very, very vital role in healthcare, and they are. You just don't see the mechanics of it every day, and it's a very important role, but they desire to be meaningful clinically. If you can bring them to the bedside, I'm telling you what, if you can tell them about patient experiences, if there is a cool case, you can call the executive assistant of whomever, the COO, the CEO, hey, listen, is so-and-so available? Have them come down. I'd like them to meet a patient. Do you think, I know that probably some of you are going to be like, oh, they're busy. It's going to be an eye roll. The last time I tried to meet with them, they put me off for a month. Okay, they're busy. They're fitting you in their schedule. You ask them to meet one of their patients, and you're going to be the conduit of them being in the clinical space. They will be there in 5 minutes, I will guarantee you. And if not, there's something missing in that administrator. Give that to them. It's amazing the rewards that will come back to them and to you. They want this. Some of you may think they don't want it, and that's why they're sitting in their office. No, they haven't been invited to your world, and they will not intrude. They don't want to be embarrassed. They also don't want to look displaced or misplaced. Call them and bring them down there. And it would be amazing. It really will be. So know and embrace the mission. You got to know the mission. I mentioned it earlier. They live by it. Comment about it. Be a part of it. The other option is be a vendor. If you all, well, some of you are probably hospital employees, but many of you have your group, small or large, has a relationship, a contract with the facility. Well, if you're integrated into the operations and the culture of the facility, that doesn't matter. But if you want to be treated like a vendor, act like a vendor. Don't do that. So you have a choice. All right. And you need to help them create the clinical narrative. It's really important. Hey, here's some great wins that have happened. We had this trauma that happened. We had this stroke save. We had all of these things. They will tell their bosses. Do you know that their bosses in those meetings, they tell their bosses? And then you hear about these things at multiple levels. And it's amazing to watch the transition of this information, one single story, one single video clip, that carries its way through a large organization, even as large as HCA, that even the CEO is proud of, because if they don't get this information, they don't know this information. It's amazing what you can do. So give them you can phrase it many different ways, but their connect to purpose. Why are we doing all of this? You're there at the bedside with all of this knowledge and information. It's not just one more shift. It's a name, it's a person, it's an experience, it's a win. Share the win and communicate it with them. It's really important. All right, I think you need to be bold. You need to be brave. You need to start a movement. And I'll describe this in a moment, but this is what I want you to do. Be different in your leadership role.
Let's watch a movement happen, start to finish, in under 3 minutes, and dissect some lessons. First, of course, a leader needs the guts to stand alone and look ridiculous. But what he's doing is so simple, it's almost instructional. This is key. You must be easy to follow. Now here comes the first follower with a crucial role. He publicly shows everyone else how to follow. Notice how the leader embraces him as an equal. So it's not about the leader anymore, it's about them, plural. Notice how he's calling to his friends to join in. So it takes guts to be a first follower. You stand out and you brave ridicule yourself. Being a first follower is an underappreciated form of leadership. The first follower transforms a lone nut into a leader. If the leader is the flint, the first follower is the spark that really makes the fire. Now here's the second follower. This is a turning point. It's proof the first has done well. Now it's not a lone nut and it's not two nuts. 3 is a crowd and a crowd is news. A movement must be public. Make sure outsiders see more than just the leader. Everyone needs to see the followers, because new followers emulate followers, not the leader. Now here come 2 more people, then 3 more immediately. Now we've got momentum. This is the tipping point, and now we have a movement. As more people jump in, it's no longer risky. If they were on the fence before, there's no reason not to join in now. They won't stand out, they won't be ridiculed, and they will be part of the in crowd if they hurry. And over the next minute, you'll see the rest who prefer to stay part of the crowd, because eventually they'd be ridiculed for not joining. And ladies and gentlemen, that is how a movement is made. So let's recap what we've learned.
All right, so you get the point. And I think it's a wonderful message, because you need to be that lone nut once in a while. But with your credibility, people will wonder why you believe what you believe. And they say, should I believe that? And I'll tell you what, you need to not just wait for the follower, enlist that support. Go to that medical director of radiology. Go to that nursing director. Go to somebody else. Say, do you believe in this? Come on, let's go do this together. And again, you concede control, and it doesn't have to be your idea anymore. Everyone knows who was dancing first. He looked ridiculously cool. Okay? He really did. And then the other person comes up and he embraces them. You know what he was really saying? They didn't say in the video, thank goodness that you joined me, because I felt like an idiot out here. So, but then you have numbers and you have support, and you can apply this concept to what you're doing. Don't feel lonely when you're alone. Feel empowered, feel excited, because it's really, really important. So start that movement. All right, so let's talk about, in the last minutes that we have, just really data as a language. You need to speak C-suite fluently. And where you need data, you need to ask them for data so that you can serve their needs and yours. And every time you have a conversation with them, you need to try and bring data. Data is how they function. They do not make decisions, nor should they, without credible data. So let's talk about a few concepts and a few examples quickly. We're going to move fast here. So the missed opportunity. I think data without a purpose are simply numbers, and it doesn't motivate anyone. You've got to choose your burning platform. Is there an exciting issue that needs to be addressed? I mentioned geometric length of stay, which prompted several side projects like the MRI project. So those are good examples. It's a burning platform. It's meaningful. It makes a difference. Don't measure things that don't matter and don't ask people to move to a number. I've said this, crazy enough, publicly, at many hospital meetings. I am not at all concerned about your experience of care scores. I'm concerned about what generates them. Who are you at the bedside, and how do we take care of people? And if that's right, the scores will take care of themselves. But how many of you have been in meetings where we need to be in a certain percentile, we need to move these up each quarter? We're talking about numbers, not about important actions, about how we can be better to people and better clinicians and a better institution and a better system whatever we're doing. Metrics and benchmarks, they can't be unidimensional, as I just stated. They're just defining the goal, that's synonymous with the goal. We want to make sure that experience of care is a little better, and it's a little better by this percent. That doesn't inspire me. We want to be better to patients. We want it to be reflected in our numbers. They do have the right to judge what they think they received, even if they can't judge the medical care that they received because they're not clinically trained, most of them. It should be three-dimensional. Define the goal, guides performance to the goal. A metric should be a guideline to get us to where we need to be to provide better care. And it should motivate the desired behavioral change. If it doesn't do that, we shouldn't have it. We should challenge it. So data with purpose, it informs the effort. It prioritizes this in the organization, and it motivates the hearts and minds of those moving mountains. We can't do all the work. But if you provide the right motivation, the right inspiration, people will want to do the right work to make things better and to really accomplish something. So metric motivation, I love this quote: if you can't fly, then run. If you can't run, then walk. If you can't walk, then crawl. By all means, keep moving. Show incremental progress so people know their efforts are worthwhile. And don't motivate people because the government tells us we have to, or because I need you to, and I'm telling you to, and your job is on the line. Don't intimidate people. Let's inspire people, and let's move information to action. So data without inspiration is simply information. The formula for success is inspiration, empowerment of those who can move the mountains, give them the resources, and now you have sustainable change. How many have you, this is not a rhetorical question, I expect a response, how many of you have worked so hard on something, you move the needle, and then people are happy, and we ignore it, and it just all falls apart? Has it ever happened to you? You need to create, as leaders, sustainable change. So the effort you put in, and more importantly, the effort you ask other people to put in, will mean something into perpetuity. Yes, you might have to revisit these concepts to make sure they're not eroding. But we can't meet the metric until people aren't regulating us anymore, until they're not intimidating us anymore. We do it because it's the right thing, and then we don't let it die when we have created the win we're looking for. So good data solves problems. Bad data creates them. Here's an example of regulation. I won't go into the details, but this article was published by several of us in 2012 in Annals. This is about OP15, where CMS sent every hospital in the nation a letter about how they needed to improve quality by reducing CT utilization. To them, at that point, quality meant cost. That was the synonymous term there. Well, what we did was we looked at our own data. We pulled the charts. And fascinating enough, over 60% of those that said that a CT shouldn't have been performed had one of CMS's own defined exclusions. But in administrative data, it didn't show up in claim submission. They had to read the chart, and they don't do that. What's really exciting about this is that they actually ultimately changed things down the road. This was CMS driven. From a trust standpoint, it was crazy because reduced cost does not improve quality. Regulation and intimidation is not inspiring. None of us wanted to do it. None of us were on board. We were not going to be a follower. And 3 years later, on June 1st, this was published by CMS. CMS proposes to remove one measure, OP15, use of brain CT in the emergency department. Yeah, thank you. What took you so long? Good data really helps things. Same problem, two approaches. My goal here with this, it's not really intended to illustrate detailed data, but doing a project within a clinical community and saying, you know what, let's give you reasons why you want to provide better care. If you look at the left part of this slide, that's a grouping of hospitals, and with CT pulmonary angiogram for chest pain, what's the variation? What's the variation of patients with chest pain, the percentages of performing that study? The gold little Monopoly house is one of them. And you look at the right side in the circle, that's the variation at one site. You give credible data to say maybe the person doing fewer is providing better care or they aren't. Maybe the people providing or doing more CTs are providing better care, or maybe they aren't. And by the way, here's the cost with it when you do this and it's unnecessary. And here are the clinical guidelines that suggest here's your range of performance and where it should be based on clinical guidelines and chart review. Are you on board? Are we going to narrow the gap because this is unacceptable? This is not the practice of medicine. This is ignoring clinical evidence. And so we really were able to move the needle in that regard as well, but by information. Regulation to inspiration, I've already talked about geometric length of stay, so I will just let you know that at some points as high as 141% of anticipated. This table, I believe it is at 122, and with intervention and focus, buy-in, and a community cultural change within a group of institutions in a system, this was driven down to 110%, and bed capacity was substantially improved. And guess what happened to ED boarding? Reduced by 30%. Absolutely, it's a case study for what we've all been talking about. But giving people the reason to do this was important. It's not about the money. Does the hospital benefit financially by improving geometric length of stay? Yes, and there's nothing wrong with that. But what comes first is providing beds for patients who need it and getting people home quicker when we can, providing better quality of care and a better experience. That's what it's about, and that's why people were willing to do all they can to change this. It can't be done by one, it has to be done by all. Frustration to inspiration. So a hip alert program wasn't working well. Patients should have their hip fixed in general within 24 hours of arrival with some limitations. You can see at the far left as low as 33% compliance with this. With conversation, with effort, with focus, and the right inspiration, that went in just a handful of weeks or just a month and a half to 94, or a little more than 94%. Certainly there was a steady state around the benchmark that was expected, around 70%, and you see it drop down to 0 because there was no data for that time period. But finding things like performing an echo earlier, making sure that there was earlier clearance for patients, consents were signed earlier, the night before instead of the same day of the surgery. These things were identified through regular meetings to do it right for the patients and really collectively benefit everyone, also helping geometric length of stay. But it was done outside of that program and that project, but it did have that impact as well. So my final comment to share with you, and I appreciate your time and attention this morning, I love this quote by Maria Montessori. If intelligence is the triumph of life, the spoken word is the marvelous means by which this intelligence is manifested. You are some of the best communicators in healthcare. Please take your skills from the bedside to hospital leadership, and you will move mountains and change the world. Thank you very much, everyone. Have a great day.